audience. And many things that we've talked about throughout this week. How do you write that, countering that just because I built it, they will come idea, which is baloney. And how do you engage your audience? How do you keep them engaged? And then after that, Brian is going to talk about teaching visual archaeology in areas within the context of a classroom. And we're talking about the leader model, it's a replicable model at its core, but it's also worth mentioning that many of the principles are important or applicable outside the context of a formal learning environment for those who are in public archaeology, parks, whatever. There are training situations. There are workshop situations that the models that we've developed in Leader to teach these skills, community engagement situations, which are actually quite useful. All right. So that having been said, so Terry will talk. Then we'll take our break. We'll come back. Brian will talk. We'll take lunch, and we'll go from there. All right. So anyone any questions as Terry is fiddling with stuff?
Yeah. Hold on.
Let's all take a look at his Dropbox.
Yep. I'm gonna try something cute. See if it works. It requires my Dropbox to work.
So does anyone have any questions or anything they want to ask before we get started?
Yeah, next Friday. In my open notes as well.
Technically, and they actually have a large storage.
Do you have my notes
You want to look into that?
Really?
I haven't really looked into it personally. I don't know if it's large number of images or individual images that are very, very small.
on my notes.
But the bottom line is, technically speaking, I suspect that if you exabytes on it, they probably say
Reorganize, or I lose everything.
yeah, you can possibly get a point. Are you good, Terry?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
All right, I'll turn it over to Terry.
Hi, everyone. How's it going? All right. Today, I wanted to do a couple things. I want to talk about promoting your project a little bit, but I want to try and put that in a little bit bigger context. Talk about social media and why social media might be something that you want to use. And then also try and put some of it into a little bit bigger context that we've, I think, all kind of discussed tangentially, but try and put some of what we're doing here into the bigger context of public archaeology as a sub-discipline of the work that we do, and where digital work fits into that discussion. So, two main objectives, why social media, right? It's our first one, and then I want to talk about two contexts for actually using social media in archaeology. The first one is professional communication, right? A lot of you are building projects where your main audience is going to be other archaeologists, students, stuff like that. So what are some ways for communicating through social media in that way? And then public archaeology, digital public archaeology, and what does that look like, and where does that fit within our discipline? So why use social media? The big question for your project in particular. Well, first, it's going to give your project a voice, right? Sounds sort of like we're empowering your project to, but in a lot of ways, right? It is. It's giving it a voice. It's letting it actually have to be able to do things in real time. To be an active participant in conversations that are happening out there in the world. Gives you a chance to expand your project's audience, right? So as Ethan said before, right, just because you built it doesn't mean people are going to actually interact with it. So at the moment, it's just sitting at home all by itself, right? Doesn't have any friends. It's, you know, it's a lonely project, right? And using social media lets it actually, you know, get out into the world, meet new people, you know, and stuff like that. So it's a way to expand your audience. It's a way to have two-way engagement. It's a way to communicate with other people, and to receive feedback, to give feedback, to be part of conversations and interactions that currently, right, most of your projects can't do just by being online database or something like that. Okay. It allows you to contextualize your work. So for a lot of you, you're building a database project, right, where it's mostly focused on the data, and there's not necessarily interpretation associated with that, right? Social media is one avenue where you can start to do that. You can start to actually give the data context, and that can either be analysis and presentations that you all do, or it can be coming from, you know, other people as well. It also allows you to promote your expertise within the discipline. So there is very much a self-promotional element to using social media. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the pluses and then also the minuses that can come along with being yourself on the internet, which can be dangerous in some ways. So, all right, I'm going to recap a little bit of what Lynn and I talked about last year, because I think last year we gave a presentation about how to build a social media strategy, and I think that a lot of you weren't quite at a point where that was something you were really ready to do yet, right? So I just want to highlight some of the elements of that talk that I think are really pretty important and valuable. So, social media for a project or institution is most effective when it's intentional, planned, and aligned with your goals, okay? So building a strategy is really one of the ways to make all of this explicit, to make it a part of what you're actually out there doing. So what do we include in our strategy, right? You want to define objectives. You guys have already done this. You may remember way back to the first day of this institute a year ago. Ethan gave a presentation about doing a lot of this for your project specifically. You want to start replicating that in your objectives for social media, right? So the objective of your project may be to interact with this certain audience and to make this certain type of data available to them. You want your social media to be in sync with that objective, right? Like if you're doing a project on, you know, a database of artifacts, you don't want your social media to be promoting how great the Chicago Cubs are this year, right? That be out of sync. You want to identify your audience. Okay, this is probably going to be the same audience, again, that you're building your project for, and you guys probably have a better grasp on what that is. But you want to identify your audience, and you want to make sure that that's a group of people you're going after specifically. You want to understand the content that you're using within the context that you want to use it. You choose the right services and tools to promote that context. You learn the culture of those tools, build the plan, like actually write out a plan, and then make goals for yourself and actually do assessment. So, you know, see if you're actually doing the things that you said you were going to do in the first place. So, objectives. Like I said, if you remember your work plan from day one, you should have some objectives already written down. For a lot of you, those have changed since day one, right? Your project took a turn to the left or the right, or it crashed and you got went to the store and purchased a new plan, right? So you want to make sure that your objectives are well defined. Audience, again, same thing. You've already identified these people, so make sure that you're using them. Content and context. What content do you have available in your project? All of your projects are generating content, right? If you're doing a database, every single data point that you put into that is content, all of it. So how can you share that in a way that's valuable? And then also, what content is best for what tools, okay? And then you gotta do the research, look at the services, okay? Know what they do, figure out how to use them, sign up for all of them. I've signed up for every single social media thing out there because I wanna know how it works, right? So I finally bit the bullet and signed up for Snapchat a couple months ago. It's actually kind of fun. I wasn't expecting that. But play with it, right? And use Sean as the example, right? He signs up for everything, he plays with everything, he breaks everything, he fixes everything. So I think that's also been kind of an element of, I think, a theme that has been going through this workshop as well, is play with stuff. So audience, content, and the tools. You want to find where those things intersect. Those are the tools that you want to use, right? So if you have a really picture-heavy project and a lot of picture-heavy content, you might want to think about Instagram, right? Of course, that's going to come along with a lot of different licensing issues. So that's where the context of content comes in, right? Perhaps you're not going to be able to use Instagram because you basically are giving all of your pictures to Facebook through that process, right? So you need to think about whether or not you're actually able to use that site or not, right? Thinking about these things, deciding what's worth it, what's not, right? At Montpelier, we decided the bang we get for giving Facebook the right to reproduce the pictures we post, we're cool with that because of what we get in return, okay? But there are objects our collections department would not be able to post on Instagram because they're on loan, right? So we can't make that publicly accessible in that way. You gotta come to the house tour if you want to see those things. All right, you guys remember this from last year? It's just a brief recap on that stuff so that you all have an idea as to what, you can refresh and start thinking about these things. Professional communication. I'm going to go in and talk about, so that was kind of the why and how of using some social media from a real nitty-gritty standpoint. I want to now talk about using social media when it's an archaeologist to archaeologist type of communication. Okay, so how does this actually, what does this actually look like? Professional communication here allows you to be an expert. Okay, you are the expert on your project. You're the voice for your project. None of your projects exist in the world. Or else right, no one else has already done what you are doing. So you're the authority on the content. And social media allows you to be that authority. And when you're communicating with other archaeologists, I think there's a little bit less of a concern that we tend to have when we're talking about public engagement. I'll talk to that a little bit later, about kind of giving up that authority or sharing that authority in some ways. Right? This you can speak from an authoritative place as experts, as people who have degrees and study archaeology and are professionals, right? And sharing that with other professionals. And as far as your project is concerned, I mean, it exists in part because you think that the information on it is valuable to other archaeologists if this is the audience that you're trying to engage with, right? So these are as far as where to actually go for some of this stuff to interact with other archaeologists, these are great places. Facebook is an excellent, everyone's on Facebook. Facebook's a good platform for interacting with anybody because pretty much everybody is on it. Twitter, there's lots of us on Twitter. I think that's become pretty clear just in being on this, right? You've seen how many archaeologists from the outside of this workshop are interacting through Twitter with us, right? And with this institute. And I've just used the WordPress logo to stand for blogs in general. So giving yourself a platform where you can write long-form work and make it publicly accessible, and then also where it is regularly being a part of the conversation. All right, because that's a really important part of getting people to come to your site and to look at your stuff. Okay, it's the for a lot of you, your projects are going to be, for the most part, static, right? You will update it occasionally because you may be putting more data on it, or you may be doing something to fix it, make it look prettier, things like that. But for the most part, right, they're a static entity. Having a blog allows you to make it interactive. Even if you do add more data, you can write a post about, we added more data, right? And you can let people know that this is something, we've added a new site, we've added more pictures, we've updated X, Y, and Z. Social media allows you to do all of those things. All right. You want personal what's the difference? How do we negotiate having personal presence on social media versus the project, right? I think for most of you, you're really going to want to be focusing on having an account for your project, okay? Not many of you, I don't think really any of you are here like building your own academic portfolio or something like that, right? It's really something project-oriented, something that isn't human in some ways, right? I would encourage you, though, to think about also having and developing your own personal brand. Something outside of your project that's still tied to it because you're the creator of it. But thinking about how to interact in that space, and in the social space as you, right? So this comes along with, and before you just go jump into this comes along with a lot of things to think about, right? About what it means to build a professional brand. And a lot of people in here have done that already, particularly faculty, right? Worked to kind of build these brands and professional brands to promote yourself, promote your own work, be an advocate for the work that you do, and stuff like that. I have no doubt that a good portion of my career, I can, in addition to the people who've helped me build my career, being online and being interactive and being visible as me has certainly helped significantly. There's been some recent conversation, I think it was Inside Higher Ed, somebody posted a piece that was pretty cranky about whether or not whether or not people are on social media just for themselves, and kind of this idea that the work, if you work hard and you're in the lab all the time and you're really the work should stand for itself, right? That should be good enough. And ideally, yes, the work should stand for itself and that should be good enough. But it's not always the case. So, being out there, being loud, promoting what you do is something that I think is pretty necessary at this point. And there's a lot of noise out there, and this is your chance to not necessarily to be a part of it, but to stand out within it, right? Nothing's personal on the internet. There's no privacy. Okay, I mean, I think, and that's not just like be careful about what pictures you post, but I mean, we've already talked this week about how Dan was talking about this, about the type of metadata, right, that museums can get about their visitors and stuff like that. Okay, like just the minute you commit to the web, just know this. Everything you put up there is up there. You can delete a tweet real quick, but man, someone can screen grab that. I mean, I think just about every professional athlete, right, has suffered from some point about posting something reactionary, deleting it as fast as possible, but it's still some reporter capturing it and it's still out there, right? Online harassment's a real thing. This has been actually researched in our discipline specifically and in archaeology. There's been surveys that have been conducted looking at online harassment. And it actually, it's an interesting study. Sarah Perry, I believe, is the one who spearheaded it, and actually finds that men and women are almost equally harassed online in some way in the archaeology discipline. It's how that's different. I think you can probably guess the differences between what women face professionally online versus what men face. For men, it's some sort of attack on our smarts or brains, or just kind of it's not gendered, it's not sexual. These are the things that obviously I don't think I really have to tell this room this, but it's definitely, it's a real thing, and it's something to keep in mind as you think about putting yourself out there as you. Okay, it's very much a real thing. Self-care. Once you're on social media, you're always on social media. This actually came up at breakfast this morning. So I pulled out my computer and added it in. You don't get to go home and lock the door of your office and go home and not be on social media anymore. Okay? People are still going to communicate with you. They're still going to send you messages. You can choose to not look at it, but it's really difficult when your phone just keeps going off and going off and going off, or when you're sitting at home trying to work on something and you keep getting notifications on your screen, right? So just, it's a commitment. Once you're on this, you're on it, and building boundaries for yourselves, and understanding how this could really turn into something that you're not expecting, or that's bigger than you think, that it becomes a bigger commitment. I mean, there's all of the science about the dopamine and the rush you get of somebody sending you a message and you needing to respond to it immediately because somebody likes me, they want to talk to me. This is great, right? It's it's real, and it's a thing to think about if you are going to get into this space, particularly as a person, as an individual. So this is obviously going to happen as well with your projects if you're managing those social media accounts. But again, those are kind of almost like a business, so it can be a little bit easier to, everybody knows that you're home alone watching television or something like that, right? But when it's an entity, it's a little less of that expectation. The big advantage, though, of all of this is you get to promote what you do, okay? And you get to build professional relationships and establish relationships that you may not have established otherwise. So I got through my dissertation in large part because of the community of colleagues that I built on social media, right? I thank them in the introduction to my, in the acknowledgments, because that's, when I moved away to Virginia to work on this, right, that became my cohort, became the people who supported me and who I supported while doing my work, right? And a lonely process, right, for those of us who've done it. So anyway, just think about weigh these options before you sort of take the plunge. For me, it's been by far and away the benefits outweigh the costs. But I also am a straight white male. So there are a lot of things I don't have to deal with online that I know other people do. And I think we've all kind of addressed that at some point in most of our talks. So our privilege extends to the online space. It's also lets you be a human being in some ways. So the nice thing about having a personal brand is you can tweet about how the Cubs are doing really well this year. Okay? Chris Bryant went 5 for 5 with 5 RBIs yesterday. I posted that. It lets you kind of flesh out who you are, and is a way to get to know other people on the web, and let people who are your colleagues get to know you a little bit in slightly more personal ways, so that you're not just building professional relationships, but you can also build friendships. For some people, right, you may not want that to be a part of who you are online. I find, again, for me, but again, I've got all the privilege, so it's perfectly fine if I post things like this, because I'm a little bit safer in a safer space. But it can humanize you a little bit. Certainly, I found with students and stuff like that that I've worked with, right? They love seeing pictures of my dog on Instagram, a little bit, right? So, but it also means that it lets them know that, like, Terry's a human. He has a furry creature that he cares for and that cares for him. Stuff like that. So it allows you to be human, and to add that element to who you are as a professional. All right, let's shift a little bit and talk about the archaeologist interacting with the public and using social media as a tool for public engagement. We have kind of skirted around, not really addressed fully, I think, in this workshop, the fact that basically by putting all of this stuff on the internet, you guys are engaged in public archaeology, right? For a lot of you, the audience may be specifically archaeologists. That's great. but it's still out there, right? It is accessible. Just a quick definition of public archaeology for those of you who may not know exactly what I'm talking about. This is that space where the public and archaeologists meet, right? It's all that murky, complicated, difficult, incredibly rewarding parts of archaeology that that a lot of us do, and some of us do every day. For those of us working at museums, right? This is, this is why we're doing it, is to bring archaeology to the public, to do that engagement, to do that work. Anyway, archaeology has, in recent decades, moved towards a collaborative archaeology, right? Something where it's not just top-down. I'm the archaeologist, right? Here is this is what archaeology is, this is how it's done, this is what it means, right? It's starting to expand, it's starting to be more inclusive, it's starting to be multivocal, it's starting to be mutually beneficial, right? So the idea that you would go out, work with a community to do a project together, right? Answer research questions that they're interested in having answered. Let them participate in the data collection, in the analysis, in the interpretation. Working collaboratively with the stakeholders in your project. This is really a way that I think, and you guys are probably mostly aware of this, but this is where a lot of public archaeology, it's what it shoots for. Now, this is going to be on a continuum, right? This doesn't necessarily mean that all public archaeology must be this, but it means that this is a possibility, and it's a thing that archaeologists are tending to drive towards, right? So I'll just use what we do at Montpelier. We're all over this continuum, okay? We're doing public archaeology that is this, where we're working with communities, bringing people in, right? We have open excavations where the public can come and participate in the excavations. We work with descendants and local community members to figure out what questions they want answered, show them the methods, let them participate in the methods. We've been planning exhibits about the enslaved African American community, and we're doing that with descendants and members of the local African American community. So, so really trying to make sure that that they're fully engaged in that process. At the same time, if you come to the museum, there's landscape signs all over the place that we wrote, right? That say, "Hey, I'm an archaeologist. Let me tell you exactly what's here and how we found it and what it means." Right? So that's not two-way, that's not multivocal, that's a sign written by one of us that a visitor reads. And that's the interaction. It's still public archaeology. It's just very different on this sort of scale of collaboration. It's very much not this, right? Still important, still valid, still counts, still public, just in a different way. The reason I wanted to sort of talk about this and to put it in the context of what we're doing and how social media really fits into this is because the emergence of that kind of public archaeology is also paralleling the emergence of Web 2.0, the social web, okay? And that's the movement from the web as a static space, right, where you put up a website and the website sits and that's the website, to spaces that people can interact with, that are dynamic, that have user-generated content, right? So Twitter is a platform that's out there and exists, but Twitter itself is not generating the content for Twitter, right? We are all generating the content for Twitter. So, all right, Instagram is not a bunch of pictures taken by employees of Instagram. It's pictures taken by the users of Instagram. So, and this extends to web-based projects that ask for people to input data or information or submit stories or things like that, right? That's all user-generated. It's not being generated by the company or the entity that's created the project. So this intersection of these two things has really led to kind of a new subdiscipline in the public archaeology world, right? It's digital public archaeology. It's the use of digital Web 2.0 tools to do public archaeology. All right? Does that make sense? Yeah. So, so it's really where these two things meet. So, congratulations, you're all digital public archaeologists, or at least once the launch happens. Okay. So, the way I think about doing this, and when Ethan actually, when I was talking with him about what kind of talk about for this talk, I said talk a lot there. It's actually started getting me thinking about, what actually is my space within this digital world? What is my contribution? How do I fit into this conversation? And it's really the fact, for me, that I'm a public archaeologist. Everything I do professionally at Montpelier and in other aspects of my professional life is focused on engaging the public, right? And that's kind of the stuff I feel like can bring to the table. And digital public archaeology is actually kind of where I started doing a lot of that stuff. So it's a subdiscipline that has kind of emerged on its own. And only recently are people actually out there talking about it as a real thing, theorizing it, right? Lorna Richardson writing the article, Why Digital Public Archaeology, right? So I mean, people starting to think about this stuff in a critical way. The idea for it actually kind of started a little bit before Web 2.0. And I like to talk about this project a lot, webarchaeology.com, that was created by a wonderful archaeologist named Carol McDavid, who, if you don't know Carol McDavid, you're missing out, because she's just an amazing human being. And in 1998, she created this project, webarchaeology.com, that was the public face of excavations at the Levi Jordan plantation in Texas. This is a fascinating project because we are pre-social media here, right? Pretty significantly. What she did with this project was she actually worked with the descendant communities, the local communities, to build this project collaboratively with them, all right? And she built it with the ideas in mind that are asking these questions about collaborative, multivocal public archaeology, right? I used the Jordan website as a case study to examine whether internet websites are effective communicative media for archaeologists to interact with their publics in open, democratic, multivocal, and relevant ways, right? I employed what has been termed a self-reflexive post-processual methodology, attempted to incorporate elements of multivocality, interactivity, reflexivity, and contextuality, right? This is embodying all of those concepts about what public archaeology is becoming and testing it. She's testing it. She's trying to see if this is going to work. Can I do public archaeology in these open ways through the internet, okay? What's interesting about it is that she's doing it before Web 2.0 has really hit the scene, okay? So, so she's asking these questions well before a lot of us started jumping on the bandwagon with social. So I tried to do this, and again, but using these social tools with the All of Us Would Walk Together exhibit. This is an exhibit that was built using, it's about my dissertation site. It's housed by Historic St. Mary's City, which is a museum in southern Maryland. It's a museum that's focused almost entirely on the 17th century capital of Maryland. That's where all of its, it's physically reconstructing the town. It's where the excavations are really focused. But they have a 19th century component as well, which is a slave plantation that existed from 1840 all the way into that then stopped being a slave plantation after the Civil War, and then continued operating into the 1950s. So, so we got funding from the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and I used it to try and build this exhibit. It's all on WordPress. And the idea was to use the digital, there are a variety of ideas. One of them was use the digital space as a means of presenting archaeology that is not going to be physically reconstructed on the landscape. Although I'm happy to say that I just received the proofs for the physical exhibit that is going up on the site. Got those yesterday, which is really exciting. So to be able to do that, but I also had similar goals that Carol had. But using Web 2.0 as a means of doing this, right? Using the social web as a companion piece. So every web, so I did it in a way that is like if you were to go to a physical exhibit, right? I kind of designed it as there are rooms that you would go into and there's display panels that you would read. And at the bottom of each one of those web pages, I had comment fields, right? I kept a blog, I did Twitter. The whole idea was to try to create a space where visitors to the site can interact with the content, right? They can provide feedback, they can give their own stories, they can do all of this stuff, right? It can be multivocal, it can be all of these things. I've yet to get a comment on a page of this website. All right? So I would say that I did not succeed in that regard. Okay? I get a lot of great feedback from other archaeologists about this, but the objective I actually had of creating this multivocal space, I haven't seen it yet. So, and it's been up for kind of a while at this point. There are a lot of reasons why I think that didn't happen. They are failings that I certainly take responsibility for. One of the things I did not do well on this project is actually interacting with the community before this project, right? And I also created a tool that I think is in a space that the people I'm trying to reach are not actually really interacting with in rural St. Mary's County, Maryland, right? I also did not get, the focus of our museum was not this time period and not this story, right? So the institutional support, well, I received the support to get the money from somewhere else to do this project. I did not get the support to promote it, to push it, to make it accessible, to make it loud, to make it visible, right? I am very curious to see how it's going to be integrated into the physical exhibits that we're now doing, since the museum is starting to tell that story and support it institutionally. And I'm curious to see if I see a bump in the interaction with this website. But there's a number of things. The URL got changed on this project. A couple years ago, I logged into it and it was gone, right? And I just about had a heart attack. But now the URL has changed. It's got a completely different URL because they changed the URLs of the entire institution. So where this was disappeared on the internet. So it has a different URL now. So even where it's been cited in people's work, if they go there, URL doesn't exist anymore, right? So that hurts engagement opportunities. So at any rate, just things that I think were barriers to this being successful in the way I intended it to be successful. It's been successful in other ways. Certainly been successful for me personally. I can demonstrate that I can build something like this. I can come here and talk to you all about it, right? But as far as what I wanted it to do for public engagement, I'm not confident that it's done exactly what I wanted it to do.
Did you promote it through social media,
like
Facebook? So
I did on my personal stuff, but my online community is not local African Americans in St. Mary's County. That's not who I am engaging with, right, online. My personal people are archaeologists, right? Other scholars, things like that. My friends, so they love it. Or at least they tell me they do because they're my friends. All right, this does lead to one of the major critiques that's starting to come out about the use of Web 2.0 and social media and archaeology and digital public archaeology. Right, we're making these claims of setting these goals of doing this, right, of creating this digital public archaeology that's multivocal and includes different voices and democratizes the internet and breaks down the barriers of the digital divide and is reflexive and collaborative and all of this. It's nice to talk about it, and it's nice to build a site that you think is going to do it, but are you actually measuring, reporting out, analyzing why or why it did not work, right? Who's actually, are you actually coming out and saying, this didn't work, this did work, here's why, so on and so forth. It gets to a lot of the stuff that Sean talked about, right, with failure. This is a really hard goal. This is really hard to do. It's right. I mean, this is the utopia of public archaeology, right? That's hard to do. It's hard to do off the internet, right? Let alone on the internet. So so it's easy to say I'm going to build a website that's going to do all this stuff and build the website, but then to come back around and say this did not work, I failed at public archaeology, is hard for people to do, right? It's not comfortable. Like that, what I just did was not comfortable for me. But this is this is something to really consider when you're, and to consider it for a couple of reasons, and I'll get into that in a little bit, about different ways to think about this. And there's been some good scholarship on starting to talk about and to bring this critique forward. All right, how do we actually do meaningful digital public archaeology? So this is we're transitioning into more of a how-to. Okay. Work with your communities and try and do it as early as possible. So if you have a public that you want to work with, or if you think you're building a project for a specific stakeholder group, maybe figure out if they want it. Okay? Anne's doing this, I think, so well with her project, right? She's building a photography, doing this, but you're doing this work and you're doing it with the community and they want it, right? And you're using your skill set and this opportunity to build something that the community has asked for. The Mali project that we heard about on the first day is exactly the same way, right? This is something that they want. Michigan State University has the skills to do this. Let's collaborate. Let's build this together. That in and of itself is digital public archaeology, right? If you are working with stakeholders to generate something that they want and need, you've done it in some ways, right? Doesn't matter if no one ever goes to the website, right? Doesn't matter. So webarchaeology.com, right? Carol's project was, I think, successful, not necessarily because of the internet engagement that happened, but because she did the work with the descendants and with the local community to build the thing itself. And that ended up being the engagement that was valuable to the people she was working with. So, we've all, a lot of us have done archaeology, right, excavations with the public, right? We have volunteers who come and work with us or whatever. And process becomes a really valuable way of doing that engagement, right? And of working with people, and that's a successful way of doing it, right? They get to make the discovery, they get to be a part of that process. You can take that and you can do the same thing with your digital project in some ways, okay? All right, this goes back to what I was talking about before, but make a plan, set goals. Make them meaningful, make them reasonable, and make them measurable. I'm going to emphasize reasonable. All right? So if you set a goal that is, I'm going to democratize the internet through this project, right? That's really hard to do. Maybe set goals that are slightly more realistic. And then figure out how to measure that success. And then, of course, make them, want to have some goals that are actually meaningful, do relate to engagement and stuff like that. But, think about different ways of setting those goals that are going to be more obtainable. Think about social media as a part of your project, not necessarily the whole project. All right? Social media, Web 2.0, can be a component of a bigger thing. So I'm going to use Montpelier as an example for this. All right? We are, the whole institution at this point, really heavy into Instagram use. We pretty much full-on committed ourselves in our department to use Instagram as a way of engaging with people. Our objective, however, is not for that project. The ones that are written down is not we are going to use Instagram as a means of creating this multivocal, two-way, break down the barriers of authority and all that stuff. That's not our objectives. Our objective is to stay in contact with people who come on our public programs and who visit our sites, and to find other people who may be interested in coming on our programs and visit our sites. Those are our objectives. That's what we're trying to do. We can do all the other stuff when they come on our project and when they spend a week with us in the unit. That's when we can do all the meaningful engagement and change and stuff like that, right? And then when they go home, we use social media as a way of staying in touch with them, right? Continuing, yeah.
So just when you're thinking about Instagram and doing it this way, are you developing content specifically for Instagram, or are you using content in your collections to engage?
Right now we're out in the field and we found an object, take a picture, write a description, post it.
So it's a combination of doing your day-to-day work and
Yep.
pumping it into this.
Yep. We're live posting our content, and because that's the community that we're trying to engage, right? Are people who have come on the project and have done that work already, and they want to know, what did you find this week in the unit I was working on? Like, we get those comments and those questions, right? Or we post something and we forget to mention where we found it. Where was this found? Is this behind the kitchen? That's the type of engagement we're looking for. So it's not, social media isn't the end. It's not the final product. That's not where we're trying to do the base of it. It's coming from part of a bigger thing that we're trying to do. And that also makes, those objectives, we can measure them, right? I can actually go in and count the number of comments that we receive from people who come on our programs, right? We can quantify how many people say that they learned about our programs when they come on our programs through Instagram, right? We've also captured, we have every email address of every person who's ever come on a program, so we could actually do a survey. How many of you are using Instagram? What have you found useful about it? Stuff like that, thing that I'm going to be building when I get back, because it's something we need to do now that we're a little over a year using Instagram at this point. So, but it lets us obtain those bigger goals of creating a public archaeology that is engaged, but it's not the project, right? It's a component of it. All right, content. Everything is content. It's all content, right? Everything you do is content for your project. Everything that's on your project is content. And you can, whether that's individual pictures or it's doing, like I mentioned earlier, blog posts or things like that that are interpretive, that are taking that data and using it. If you have other scholars who work in the field that you work in, communicate with them, ask them if they'd like to publish a post about the work that they're doing so that it can be disseminated to the public. Ask members of the community that you're working with. Perhaps they would like to use your blog as a means of communicating about things that are relevant to the project, what it means to them, right? These are all ways to generate content that you can just churn out through social media. Make sure you're communicating. These are communication tools, right? So don't just be a social media account that just puts out your content. Get out there. Find people. I mean, this is work. You can do the same way that you want to use social media to make sure your website just doesn't sit at home alone, right? If you go out to, if you just stand in the corner right, and don't say anything and are just kind of like, you know, you have to, it's like going to a conference, right, and you get up and you give your paper, and then if you just go sit in your hotel room the whole time, right, like you're not really getting the value out of that experience, right? You need to go to the bar, and you need to meet the people, and you need to talk to them, you need to network, and you need to do that. You gotta do the same thing with social media. Just because you started a Twitter account doesn't mean people are gonna follow it or engage with it. You need to give them reasons to do that. And you need to go out and find them. At some point, you may hit the tipping point, right, where you don't have to go out and do that, and people come to you. And that's an awesome feeling when that happens. So, this is part of learning the language of the digital community that you're, the tools that you're using. Okay, so on Instagram, it's hashtags, right? I don't entirely know why it's hashtags, but it is. So if you post a picture of a sunset, you want to put hashtag sunset. I don't know why it works, but you're guaranteed you're going to get that many more people, so many more people engaging with that content just because you're speaking the language of the people who are there, right? So I mean, you can think about it anthropologically, right? These are all languages. Each account, each tool has its own culture, and then there are subcultures within each tool. So Google Black Twitter at some point, and you can see the research and what people are talking about. The ways that African Americans engage with Twitter is very different than the ways that white Americans are engaging with Twitter. It's a very different language, different way of posting, different way of communicating. The platforms mean different things. So, and then when people do reach out to you, talk back. It's kind of rude not to. But these are reciprocal tools, right? I've always found that when, it's just like talking to human beings, but if you're polite and nice to people, they typically respond the same way. Social media can be a really positive place when it's done that way. And it can be really good for your project, if you're treating the communities that are engaging with you respectfully, of course, but then also, like, part one of that is just communicating with them, period. So, measure and report. Do the research. Figure out if you succeeded, figure out if you failed. Share it with all of us so that we can learn from your mistakes, right? And then also, so that you can learn from your mistakes and from the things that didn't work. It's not a big deal if you don't meet your Twitter follower goal in the first year. It's an arbitrary number. First of all, you get to pick it, right? I want 100 followers by this time next year. Cool. You can end up with 75. Okay. What didn't you do? Did you stick to your plan? Were you posting regularly? Are you responding to everybody's comments? Have you put the time and work into going out and finding all of the people who care about Mayan archaeology, right? Like, are you putting in that work? If you're, are you doing what you said you did? That may be why you didn't meet the goal, right? Or maybe something completely different. But taking time to critically think about it, as opposed to deciding, well, I didn't meet my goal, so it doesn't work, so we're just not going to do this anymore. Give it a chance, but make sure you're really doing the work to get there. So lastly, I mean, like I said, you're all digital public archaeologists now. Your projects are inherently public just by the fact that they're on the internet, and that you're going to make them open and accessible, right? Social media is a way for you to give those projects a voice and for them to be a part of conversations, to not just be a resource. It's a way for them to be more valuable than that. I'm done. Thank you.
All right, questions for Terry?
Really hot up here. Don't know why. Yeah.
So I was thinking a bit about the public digital archaeology sphere name, and how that aligns with the sort of intense research data collection collection and objectives for those types of audiences, and how you use that to sort of meet the needs of different audiences. And so the thing I'm thinking of is, so a lot of what we've talked about in here over the past week and in the past year is, making our research data and our data sets clean and getting them into open context so that they can be shared, and really the audience for that feels like it's very much researchers and others who
Right.
are interested in it. How do you take that and sort of apply it, use that as a base for creating digital public archaeological experiences that other users and audiences would find compelling? So, for example, you said your assessment of your project was that you put on the one that you showed that was part of your dissertation.
Yeah, the walkthrough. Yeah.
That you felt that wasn't successful.
It wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't successful in that the communities I wanted to be using that space, and the way I wanted them to use it, they weren't. But I mean, it's obvious. There's literally no comment anywhere.
So I mean, I'm
So-
trying to figure out. So that you were basically the researcher.
Yep.
It was your data.
Yep.
And you were maybe not as familiar as you could have been about the audiences you wanted to reach. You
Correct.
just knew broadly what you wanted.
Yep.
But how willing are archaeologists, because I'm not one,
Mhm.
I'm more a digital librarian interested in public experiences with the data, to sort of like pull out pieces and tell stories with your data that remove it from its broader context but maybe creates another thread. And so partly it's the storytelling.
Yeah.
And that's coming across a lot in experiences that NEH is looking for in new projects. It's
Sure.
not just collect the data. It's what are the stories and how are you reaching people with this, especially in the public engagement component.
Yeah, it's got me. So again, always defining your audience is first and foremost, right? So if you're doing a big, like you were just talking about cleaning the data, all of this stuff, there are audiences of people who are not archaeologists who do, I mean, you yourself, not an archaeologist, right? But here you are working with a bunch of archaeologists on archaeological data. So your audience may not be, a school teacher, or it may not be, just a descendant of the group project. Perhaps you're doing really big, complex data work, and you want some of your posts and things like that to be geared towards other scholars or other professionals who do that work with big data, which is certainly a thing. I mean, that's everywhere, right? But big data is all over the internet. So, yeah, Eric.
I think you're totally right. I mean, one of the things I was struck by what you were saying too is that the need for a lot of intellectual engagement, investment in social media, right, and how to do engagement.
Mm-hmm.
And we always struggle with this with data too, because it's about as much fun as reading a phone book. So it's not that exciting, it's not that interesting, it's very technical. And we don't have the capacity to transform this into meaningful stories that people can actually navigate. And so having roles for people who could sort of contextualize data in ways that people can understand and engage with, I think is a really interesting opportunity. But that is something that really requires that same level of engagement and investment that you were just describing. So this is, so we're building ourselves mountains of work to do, which is really cool. We just need to have the people to do it.
Yeah. Well, and so what's been interesting about the discourse about digital public archaeology very, very recently is that people are starting to say, this is public archaeology, this does take work, just like public archaeology takes work. I mean, if you've done any public program, you know it's work, even if it's just like Archaeology Day on a Saturday and just open the site up and have, kids come and visit. It's work, it's a lot of work. There's logistics, there's planning, there's, advertising, marketing, all of that stuff. We have a public archaeologist on our staff. We hired someone to do that work because it is so much work. And so, but then, I mean, Eric, for you all, I mean, you have content people everyone who uploads or gives you data. I mean, part of that agreement could be, we need a blog post that talks about what this is, gives us some context for it, how you think it could be usable to other researchers, yada, 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 right? I mean, there's ways to, like I said, content's everywhere. It's everything we're doing is content. I remember talking to a woman who did digital media for the Smithsonian, and and this was 5 or 6 years ago, but she said the most popular blog post we have is about why art historians wear these little white gloves. Like, that's the most popular post. That's process. So you never know what might actually really be the piece of content that just takes off. It may be something as simple as, this is why we wear these gloves. So, but yeah, so content's around. I'm not sure if that's for addressing your question in some ways.
And it goes a little bit to what Eric was saying, is that like we're making more work for ourselves.
Yep.
And I think what we're making, or what this data collection is also doing, is making work for people who work in other disciplines. So you've done this archaeological thing, but then there's a narrative could come out of it. I don't know if it's like a day in the life of a pot from like some other time period. And
So
That's the thing, that's the sort of thing I think that we can involve. I'm so excited about the potential for involving students in this.
Mhm.
So through the kind of get your hands on some data sets, begin, tell a story. And one of the things that I spoke with our digital librarian at UVic about, they're getting the Fedora interface that'll have an exhibit interface with that. And so, or Fedora repository with the exhibition interface. And so the notion that we can involve students in telling some of those stories,
Absolutely.
I think is really an exciting possibility.
And that's something that Lynn and I did at the first campus archaeology field school. Was we had students blog as part of their experience, and then we've taken that same model at Montpelier, and the most content we generate every year is we require every student on our field school to man the Instagram account for a day, and they have to post 3 posts, and we review them before they go up because we obviously want the
I was
content
going
to
to
be
say, we
correct.
do have right of edit and
Yeah.
refusal.
Absolutely.
Posts.
So, but
So they
that's
don't go up automatically.
but that's actually a really great moment, because that's actually a teachable moment.
Right.
Because that's, hey, I wrote this thing, and then you get to look at it and you get to say, actually, I mean, we learned in our field school that no one understood stratigraphy.
That's right.
Like, it was this sudden moment where we were like, oh my God, they have no idea what's going on. And we would have gone the whole field school thinking everything was fine,
Or
and
you
it
have
turns
a
out.
student who is digging on a historic site on campus and decides to write a blog post about, ancient Egypt.
Yeah.
And
So, but I mean, they also bring their own perspective to it, which is really neat. My favorite blog post was written by a student who wrote about teamwork in archaeology, right? So it was not an it was talking all about how everyone gets to the site early, we all help set the site up, we all help break it down, we all work together. I mean, this person has pulled something out of field school that they can take with them. Like, that's the transferable skill, right? So students are a tremendous resource for generating content and stuff. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's another example, though. It's work.
it is work.
And so it's work teaching, and it's work with the student, and it's work on the quality of the communication that's going out. And and so you can think, oh, turn over Instagram, but
But you're
Yeah.
not.
Even though
You're not.
you're
It's
not.
correct.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just another element
Right.
of work, which is quite valuable. And I think that other point too is that they can, students can translate things that we tend to speak in archaeo speak and not realize it's not regular human communication.
And that's really hard.
Yeah, and so they can be really great for that, and also having this refreshing perspective on things that are to us quite quotidian or not even necessarily noticeable.
So we wrote an article about the blogging project. It's in Internet Archaeology 38 or something like that, but kind of gets into all the different reasons why. Again, even if no one had ever read the blog posts, as a pedagogical tool, these were incredibly useful and valuable.
But I will
to
say
us.
the other thing we did do for that project is we kind of begged a group of people to comment on the blog post.
Yeah.
So that
We-
the students
we
didn't
seeded
feel
the
they
site,
were
and-
just,
No.
yeah. They were just out there and nobody cared.
Well, and we were very clear also in the blog and everything surrounding that blog that if you were coming to this space, you were basically entering our classroom.
Yeah.
So to be respectful, be mindful of the fact that these are students who are learning and that we're inviting you into the classroom, and that was what we did.
And it wasn't a
have any
huge
problem.
problem. We didn't have a lot of garbage.
Well, and I think the other thing in this idea of open access, that it's the same thing as posting a syllabus or other sorts of pedagogical materials, that other classes use those blog posts, the videos, the commentary, and it's a great resource for not just that one field season or one field school over a few years. It's something that has the potential for a really wide appeal.
And also, any student who works with campus archaeology, we also require them. We have a blogging schedule. They all have to blog.
Yeah, I did the same.
Yeah.
I have a couple, one big question. I have a lot of public archaeology I have a lot of public archaeology projects online that I just don't touch anymore because I've been doing this since 2004, and some have gone away on their own when I graduated from a particular institution, but others are just kind of like hanging out there still. And I don't know if I should archive them and delete them or just leave them out there. So what are your opinions on that?
That's actually probably a good question for the whole faculty, because sustainability is a really big question. I mean, you can still go to webarchaeology.com. You can still go to, and she leaves that up there, not because it's really so much, I've talked to her about it, not so much because it's a resource about the Levi Jordan plantation, but because she knows that for archaeologists and for people who want to do this work, it's kind of, she's archived it and that. So she hasn't gone in and clearly hasn't updated it. Right? It's still a 1998 website. So I mean, I think sustainability is something that is incredibly important and really complex. And when is a good time? Like, when should you take a project down? Should you take a project down? How do you pass it on? I know a lot of you are thinking about, I'm going to be in this job for 3 years or something like that, right? And I need to make sure that my code and that, all of this is transferable. I just did this with the SHA's social media stuff. We passed it on to a new social media coordinator, and that, making sure that transfer happened in a way that was smooth and stuff like that. Do you folks have things to say about? I know, Eric, you've thought a lot about this.
Yeah, I don't know if I thought more than that. But I mean, one option is that if some of that stuff would be valuable and some of it has potential for reuse. And you may want to consider, if you go to the Internet Archive, and I'm going to tweet the link, there is actually a link, a button that you can put where you can paste in a URL and it will archive that URL. So, and it's the Internet Archive, and so it's, it's awesome. More ideally, you would also have university support to be able to archive these things too, since the Internet Archive is really, really vast, and it's generally safer to have things back to the multiple places, I guess. But at least it's better than nothing. And that would be a nice way of being able to sort of capture that stuff. And then you could actually point to people with, if you want to curate some of this stuff on yourself, to the copy that's in the Internet Archive. So I did some papers back in 2000, 2001 that are on the web, and the websites are totally gone. And those are in the Internet Archive. And I actually link to those sometimes when I need to be able to reference something that a copy group I wrote a long time ago, back when I was, didn't know how to write. So.
Yeah, when I was at Pomona, I taught at Pomona for 12 years and had 8 years worth of online teaching materials that, at the point when my appointment there ended, after I resigned, IT got hold of me and said, this domain we've managed for you, we're about to get rid of it, what do you want to do with all this stuff? So I ported everything over into a subdomain of my own website. I've got it all, but there was a bunch of it that was built in extremely creaky old installations of Drupal that didn't work anymore, and some of it in old MediaWiki installations, things like this. I ended up exporting a whole lot of it to static HTML and just posting it so that the content is still available, but all of the interactivity is gone. And just with a note saying this is a static archive, the material is here if you want it, but that enabled me at least to maintain some feeling like that content had totally disappeared, but not feel like I also have to keep up with Drupal or what have you.
So,
Helpful.
so this was something I meant to mention and forgot to, but just as another an example that actually worked that I did of a way to engage with publics that one strategy, and this was something I did on my obviously on my personal blog as Terry Brock, not as part of a project, but engaging yourself and using digital media as a means of engaging yourself into contemporary issues that are happening in the real world, right? So, and Jolene knows plenty of about this. In Richmond, there was a big effort to build a ballpark in the middle of the historic space where the domestic slave trade was at its peak in the mid-19th century in Richmond. And there was zero conversation about archaeology going on through this entire debate. And the conversation that was happening was terrible. You know, what happens when the backhoe hits a building? That's, you know, oh, well, we'll deal with it when we get to it, right? I mean, the conversation was just completely missing. The questions were wrong, the answers were wrong, everything was wrong. So I wrote a sizable blog post about this, talking about, you know, what archaeology is going to be there. You know, what's the potential for there to actually be any archaeology there? You know, where has testing happened in this area? Where hasn't it happened? You know, looking at the documents and identifying the sites and blah, 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 blah. This thing took off, and definitely the most popular thing I've ever written. And eventually, local communities picked it up. We started working together, built an organization out of this engagement, and they've not built a ballpark. And archaeology ended up being a really important part of that conversation because we basically said, like, this is going to cost you way too much money. Yeah, so I posted it and I sent it to reporters. I sent it to, you know, I was online, figured out who all the major players were and having this conversation, sent it to them. I mean, it was, you know, again, you can't just post it and let it sit. You got to get it out. So, you know, and eventually it kind of, there ended up being a big forum that was organized about archaeology, and I got pulled in to be part of the planning committee on that because I've been loud about it. So, but so this is, you know, so there's different ways of doing this engagement, but all of you can, you know, you're going to be you're going to be the online authority on the thing that you're researching, right? So, so if something's happening in your community or the community that your project is based in, right? You can. This is a platform for making the archaeology visible, and it cuts out the middleman, right? I mean, this. You don't have to call the reporter to come out to do the interview with you, and then they interpret what you're saying wrong, and then it gets. You know, I just got quoted in a paper saying that our slave quarters had brick floors. They do not. You know, right? We've all been there. You get to do this on your own. You get to be your own publisher. But then that means you also have to be your own marketer, right? So you have to do the work to do that. But I know, I mean, a lot of you are bringing spaces, communities, topics to the web that aren't on the web, right? Indian archaeology, or the archaeology of India, right? But it's not something that's on the web, right? And you're going to be. We've talked about this, right? You're going to be the authority on this on the internet now. So using that, no pressure. But you can be. You can make yourself that. If, you know, that's kind of what I'm getting at. This is you can create.
Sean's word and say
Champion.
Yeah, champion,
There you
go.
Lots of flex emojis.
Yeah, go with champion.
Yeah.
I like what you were saying about your project, where you have to know your audience and who your audience is, and what social media they're using, and if you have multiple audiences, maybe you have a public audience and students and your colleagues, they don't all go on the same social media.
Exactly.
I mean, Instagram, I find no one knows who Underwater My is. They don't care.
Right.
Facebook, lots of people in Belize are on Facebook because it's easy. They've got cell phones, and that's the only way they can communicate. They don't have the internet so much. And Twitter, it's great for everybody here.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes it's a fragmented social media, that some of your colleagues are in one place or another, and so it's really complicated.
Absolutely. Yeah, and so you want to build out strategies for engagement that are different for each one of those platforms, right? And in the same way that if you had a group of 10-year-olds coming out to work on your site, you would, or visit your site, well, I mean, just that reaction, right? You're going to treat that group of 10-year-olds very differently than you're going to treat a group of 50-year-olds who come out, you're going to engage with them differently. They're going to do different activities than they're going to do. So it's the same thing with social media. You're going to use these tools in different ways depending on what community we're trying to engage with, and of course what the content is that you're going to share with them and stuff like that. So using Instagram to share a bunch of links is not going to be, you literally can't do it. So I don't let you put links into the descriptions and stuff like that.
Okay, folks, it's 10:15, so let's all thank Terry for this.
I'm Brian Geyer. I am my official title here is research assistant, but we were encouraged to come up with other titles. So I'm a 3D technologies assistant because that sounds way better.
Sounds much better.
Yeah. And somehow I ended up anchoring this. I don't know how, but I guess I blame Ethan. So anyway, I want to talk to you today about teaching digital technology and digital literacy in the undergraduate, mostly the undergraduate classroom, because I've never done it in the graduate classroom since I'm still working on that. All right, so let me start with a little bit about developing Leader as a program or a partnership or however you wanted to describe it. We're not like an official program, but let me just go into like a little bit of our brief history. We're a partnership between two departments here at MSU, and we're primarily in the history department in collaboration with the anthropology department and with heavy support from Matrix. A couple years ago, the chair of the history department applied for funds from the provost for teaching and learning environment and received about $127,000 to develop this place. And most of that, I think, went to our technology because the history department itself put up the space and pays for the salaries of the full-time employees for Leader, starting first with Brandon, the director, and then adding on Alice Lynn just a month ago or so. Yeah. A part of the progress of developing this place was the willingness of history to cover the future operating costs or to continue applying for future operating costs, but that obviously the seed money was not intended to last forever and that they would continue to pay salaries of the full-time employees. And then a large amount of the work that's done in here is directed by Brandon and Alice Lynn, but it's conducted by graduate assistants such as myself and our founding graduate assistants, Liz Timms and Justin Long, if I remember. Justin Rowe. I don't know how I got that wrong. We have gone through some more, and we have brand new graduate assistants this semester that I can not remember all of their names, so I apologize to all of them, but I will know you soon within like a week. So I've written a lot more about graduate students because I like to advocate on behalf of my fellow graduate students. So the great thing about working in here as a graduate student is that it's really adding to my CV in terms of my accomplishments as an educator, because I teach a whole lot more than I would if I was a teaching assistant. Also we are paid as assistants, which is excellent, but if you end up doing something like this in the future, I would hope that you guys would pay them as relative content experts, because you're asking graduate assistants to teach, or graduate students to teach at a level that many of their colleagues can't even do. So just something to keep in mind. When building a program like this, remember that tech equipment is expensive. The computers in the room are all expensive. Our DSLR cameras, our laptops, our tablets, everything is expensive. And if you're a technology laboratory or technology program, usually there's the implication that you're at the forefront of technology, which is not true at all because you can't afford to be. But that does mean that you'll probably be replacing equipment as you go along, and so it's not. It's something to keep in mind that the funds need to be a little bit higher than somebody might initially expect, because it's not a one-time cost. I've written a lot about supporting Macs and PCs here on this slide, and that's because I am a PC person who knows Mac, and almost all of my colleagues are Mac people who know PCs, but we sort of negotiate what we want to support because students come from various backgrounds, and those that use Mac tend to be a little bit more digitally literate than those that use PCs, and you can't be a Mac-centric program if you're reaching all undergraduates, because the ones that use only PCs are most likely to be the least digitally literate. And if you throw them onto Macs and try to, well, you could teach them on Macs and they will hopefully learn it, but it's one less hurdle having them transition over. So that's why I throw that in there. I am sure that some of my colleagues might disagree with me, but that's how I view that sort of subject. So the takeaway is, if you're building something like this, have both Macs and PCs, which you can see in our room that we do. And another thing that we'll come up with if we talk about specifics of projects that you have students do, you want to have at least 2 or 3 computers that can handle the heavy stuff in terms of computing things, if you want to end up doing the heavy stuff in terms of teaching things. So like 3D technologies, printing and scanning require a lot of processing power. They require, like a scanning, especially with the scanner that we have, requires a lot of RAM in your computer to handle the scanner itself. The 3D photogrammetry program that we use, PhotoScan, requires a lot of processing power, the computer processor or the graphics processor. So those need to be high level. So if you're going to go into those technologies for teaching students, you don't want to hand them a severely underpowered computer and ask them to do it. It will just add to the frustration. So just something to keep in mind as well. When you're getting started, make sure to reach out to other areas on campus to develop sort of a list of resources that are available for you to use in your lab when working with classes. So I've written down the library and the College of Arts and Letters, which are the 2 main resources that we pull from here. And I can get a larger list, or Brandon can get a larger list of all the places that we can pull from here on campus, but these happen to be the 2 that we work with the most. And then there's also, you want to understand those specialty resources. If you don't have the capability of getting for your own space the high-powered computers or whatnot, you want to find out if those are available for you to partner with elsewhere on campus to send students to use and things like that. And I think this might be the last slide for like the background of Leader and developing a program in general. You'll want to make sure that you have key faculty support in any departments. For Leader, we had key faculty in history and anthropology, but more in history than anthropology, which kind of makes sense since they are taking the lead here at Leader. And what was absolutely crucial for us was having department chairs that supported this place. Without department support, without chair support, I don't imagine something like this succeeding at all. And then I've written down faculty willing to use social and political capital. What I mean by that is if you're getting resistance from other faculty members, you have to have somebody or a few people who are willing to say, this is worthwhile, this should happen in our program, we want to take the risk and do it. And if people aren't willing to step up and say that, it might not be the best time to try and undertake the program. And also, obviously, trying something new. All right. So, how do you build support in your own department? Let's say you've got your faculty chair, you've got a couple key people who are ready to go, who want to help this out. You've purchased, I don't know, you've got space, you've got everything ready to go, and now you need to find actual faculty members to partner with for developing projects. You need to make a case for why the skills that you're going to be imparting into students are relevant beyond the narrow circumstances in which they learn them. So, knowing how to write in HTML and CSS is useful for people beyond writing like the websites that they write in their classrooms. It's sort of like saying that in 10 years in the general American workplace, a hypothetical boss may say, hey, go update our website. and people need to know how to do that. Just like right now, people need to know how to use a copy machine. I don't know if that's the case, but it's certainly possible, and like it's within the realm of possibility. And the more people that become technically or digitally literate, the more likely it is that that will become possible, because there will be less of a reason to have that as a specialty skill set off to the side, right? So you kind of need to make that case. But you also want to make the case for the academic relevance, because obviously professors are interested in teaching their students things that are related to their field. So if digital technologies were entirely useless within the world of anthropology, why would I be here doing this today, right? I need to make that case. So yeah, I'm like the only sociocultural anthropologist in the room, I think.
I think that's true.
Is that true?
Yeah.
You're used to that by now.
Yeah, I am used to that.
They didn't, but I have to say, nobody applied that was a cultural
That's true.
anthropologist.
So, which might also
Just
say something.
saying it wasn't a prejudice on our part.
So yeah, and I think that these skills are absolutely crucial to the future of anthropology in all of the general 4 fields, or however many fields you want to describe. So there is a case to be made. If anybody wants me to make the case, I will, but not as a part of this. I can do it later. You want to outline the basics of any partnership between faculty members and your program. You know, what are faculty members expected to do? How are they expected to interact with their students in relation to the project? How are they expected to interact with your employees in the project or lab or whatever? And then you'll need to gauge the faculty interest in general, because if you have, say, 2 people in your entire department who are interested and everybody else is vehemently opposed, you may be able to get it started, but are you really going to be able to make it successful? You have to be able to make inroads, and so that's something to keep in mind. And you should definitely start by approaching amenable faculty first. The ones who are not digitally literate themselves may not do any work that is related to digital technology or digital topics in general at all, but seem to be supportive of the idea of incorporating digital technology and digital approaches into their research and into the way that they teach students. And those early, even partial successes are really important in making the future case for continued use or the continuation of your program. Once you have, once everyone in the department knows about your program, stop telling them about your program in bulk. It does not work anymore. They know about it. The people who are interested are interested. Those who are not are not. Those who are on the fence are on the fence, but they all know about it. And continuing to tell them about yourself in bulk is not going to help. You need to go one-on-one at that point. And you want to make sure that you're reaching out to faculty members who are on board or who may be on the fence, but you think you can nudge them in your direction to get them to partner with you. And it helps to have repeat faculty members who can help make that case alongside you. And so you reach out to those early professors who partnered with you, continue to work with them on courses as they move forward in other courses, so you don't just have, say, your intro archaeology course doing it over and over and over again, but they branch out into other courses that they're doing. And then you utilize them in conversations with faculty members who are on the fence to sort of get that ball rolling in the direction that you want. And you honestly want to start early. Neoliberalism has come up several times. Thank you. Yeah. Numbers and like goals of number of students reached or specific quantitative benchmarks that programs or departments want to hit for how they're how many people they're getting to their reaching out to. This is really hard for me to convey, but you want to get the number of classes to a good point with like a minimum level of scope of your projects. You don't want, say, you're reaching 500 students and all of them are doing the lowest, barest level of a digital project that's entirely possible. That would not look good. But if you can get even a minimally more substantial project to 250 students, and you can do that a couple or 3 semesters in a row, that really helps to solidify your case for moving forward with expansion and with increased partnerships. And then once you can start saying, okay, we have a cap for the number of courses we're going to partner with, or we have a cap with the number of students that we're going to try and get through our program, and you want to increase the scope of the program of the projects that they're involved in, so you get more and more worthwhile but more technically complex projects going. And then once you have that established, then you can run the gamut of really complex to something that's still substantial but not necessarily as complex as say an entire semester's worth of a project. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, so how do you actually develop a project with faculty members? Well, you have 2 avenues of development, and at least according to me, I'm sure there are more. And the first one is that a digitally literate professor develops their own project entirely. That's Ethan, who has basically done all of his work and then handed it to me and said, "Here, do this." And you rely, and then the professor relies on your program's resources for implementation and instruction, even if they can teach the technology that's involved. They still hand it over, because we have the specific knowledge of the resources that are in the room, and they may not have that because they're not as involved. And then the far more likely avenue of developing is to co-produce the project with the professor that you are setting out to do it with, and you want to have at least 1, probably 2, 3 might be a bit much, brainstorming or workshopping sessions with them to come up with key ideas, the things that they want their students to learn, big picture stuff, usually more so than, say, the minute details of how do you add this one thing to whatever. And the idea is you want them to collaborate with you and produce the project together, because as my last point says, developing the project without professor involvement, where they just say, "Here, do it," is a really big red flag that they aren't at all interested. They just are looking for something to throw into their course, and that's not going to help anyone, except maybe them, but probably not. So yeah, you want to make sure that it's collaborative, that you're talking. They can be entirely illiterate digitally, and yet they will, of course, have great ideas about what they want their students to learn. They'll listen to the things that you can give them as basic ideas, and they will run with them, and you can help either expand those or rein them in, however it is, but the point is to talk to them about it. All right, so I just have 2 quick pictures that we have. Course sizes from this room in general handles courses about this size, maybe 7 or 8 students, all the way up to 30, probably 35 is our max. And you'll, of course, want to go with whatever you have for your own room. But the point is to say you want to make sure that you have a good idea of how many people can be taught in the space that you have, and do not try to push it much beyond that. If it was this room and we had 45 students in here, I doubt any of them would learn anything just from the close quarters and not enough space to have their computers out and distractions all around and stuff like that. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's something important to keep in mind. And then, of course, the size of the project itself within the course curriculum and the student's grade is important to keep in mind. You don't want to build this big, complex, mentally demanding, like massive project and then have it only be worth like 10% of the student's grade, unless the other 90% is that large that it necessitates such a small portion of the grade. Does that make Yeah, so something to keep in mind. If you're taking up, I don't know, I think of it, this may be the wrong way to think of it, but I think of it as how much class time am I taking away from the professor, and is that percentage amount, roughly equivalent to how much the grade ends up being at the end of the semester. Maybe that's not the right way to do it, but that's how I think about it. And then when you're talking to those professors about the big picture items, you want to focus on those concepts that you're teaching rather than specific tools. I'm going to go into these in more depth in maybe the next slide or two. But for example, talking about web design and what makes a website, what best conveys material on a website rather than, like, aesthetically, rather than just, I'm going to teach WordPress. Because although teaching WordPress may be useful to some people today, how long do we honestly think WordPress will continue to be like the dominant tool that's being used? It could be a while, but it could also crash tomorrow and never be used again, right?
Oh, no, right.
It's not going to happen.
Brian,
But-
you shouldn't have said that.
It's not going to happen. WordPress will be around forever. But the point is to say, don't teach to the tool, right? Another one is video editing. We do a lot of video projects in here, and we teach on PCs, we teach Camtasia, and on Macs, we teach Final Cut Pro, and if students already know iMovie, we suggest they continue to use iMovie so that we're not confusing them. But you're not teaching those specific tools. You're teaching the aspects around creating a video, like what is a visual narrative? What kind of story are you trying to tell? Realize that you're not being objective in any way. Video production is subjective, and that kind of like overarching theme is much more important in your focus when you're coming up with your projects. And then, like I said before, with time, that you want it to be roughly related to the grade or to the percentage of the curriculum. Another thing to think about is that you need to actually sketch out the time, which sometimes people don't think about. But if you have a project that's going to require 3 sessions of technical training and then they will build the project, is it really enough just to have the 3 sessions? Or should you probably have a flipped classroom where you have 2, say, directed lab sessions where they can come in, use your resources in the space. You have your relative content experts, your graduate students, or whoever is in charge of that project that's in the room helping to answer questions, and you make sure that students are getting a little bit more than just the one-directional, here's how you use this tool, right? And I can't tell you how crucial Open Lab Time has been to the success or failure of projects in here. They really do help enormously. And then, of course, keep in mind due dates. Something that I talk about with faculty a lesson that I've learned from when Leader started in 2014 to today is that you can't have too much time between sessions, and you also can't have too much time between your last session and when the thing is due. Students, we all know, procrastinate. I procrastinated. My slides got to the tech person like 20 minutes ago. Procrastination happens, and you shouldn't necessarily, you shouldn't give in to students' procrastination and I'll just allow them to do it like freely, right? But at the same time, you don't want a project to completely fail because you front-loaded all of your teaching and all of your open lab times to the front half of the semester and then had it due at the end of the semester. The project just isn't going to come out good. So it's a good idea to keep that in mind and make sure you plan your sessions, but also your due dates appropriately. There's the number of students again. Oh yeah, so if you do have a class that's bigger, it's not a problem, just split them up. But of course, the professor has to be willing to do that. And it usually means either they lecture to half the class one day and half the class another day, if you can do 2, or they do video lectures online to make up for time that's missed, not missed, but the time that's spent in the lab for the different groups. We have a very large class that comes through here once a semester or once a year. What's Michigan history? Once a year? Once a year. And it's like 120 students, 80 to 120 students, somewhere in there. And we have them sign up for our instruction sessions, and we do all in 1 week. We do like 10 sessions, and then we have them come in smaller groups so that we can get them through it. And we do that because even if we went to the classroom to teach it all to them, it would just be talking at them. And it's really, this all works a lot better when you have these smaller groups. And finding creative ways to adhere to having smaller groups is really the best way to do it. And then I reiterated instruction and open lab sessions and due dates because they are that important. All right. The one other thing to remember or one other thing to keep in mind is that students are not as digitally literate as people might think. There is a lot of rhetoric around the millennials or the next generation after the millennials. I'm one of them, I guess, who are just automatically literate in digital technology just because they grew up with it, and it's not true at all. There may be a higher level of digital literacy, but it's not much higher, I don't think. And it can really get in the way fast if you're just thinking, oh, these students will know how to do this, no problem. You may find some students who can barely operate their own computer, and you'll be building on top of that. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, I covered that. Oh yeah, one other thing when you're figuring out the space of your sessions, it can help to just throw in, say, a 10-minute question and answer at the beginning of at the beginning of a lecture to sort of make that contact and remind them, and then it also gives you a chance to gauge their position within the project itself and any problems that are arising, so you can address them more completely in another session. And then it also helps to have like an intro that you do where they're not actually learning anything that's related to the project itself, but getting a sense for where they're going to be working, what they're going to be working on, without asking them to start doing it or to start actually learning it. And those don't have to be very long. They can be really short. But we find that that's easier saying, say, go to the classroom and say, hey, I'm Brian. I'm going to be working with you guys on this project. Here are the things you guys are going to do. Don't worry if you're really scared about it right now. We will work with you to get this figured out. And then that's like 15 minutes, and then you're done. And then they come in the week after that or something like that. If you do that right at the first session, sometimes it's fine, sometimes it isn't at all, because students shut down from just being like unprepared. So that's something to keep in mind. Getting into specifics, I guess. Put a week between your last session and when the project is due. And that isn't related to procrastination so much as students get that directed time, and then they have the time to finish the project itself, and problems may come up. And if they have procrastinated, that is more likely. But even if they haven't, things just simply happen, and like you get stuck on something that you don't realize how to finish. And so it's a good idea to do that. Now, the way Leader handles that is we are always, with a few rare exceptions, we're always open, even when classes are happening in here. And we have someone who can answer questions for walk-ins. And then we make sure that the information about any specific project is available to all of the workers, who are all generally trained on the things that we teach in here. So any one worker can step aside, take a look really quick at what a specific project is about, and then provide guidance or advice to the student. Or if that's not going to work, get them, inform them when a student who will know can help them. Does that make sense? So we're basically always available when our door is open, and we can allow students to walk in and fix those problems. And then something that others have mentioned to me, but I haven't dealt with because I don't, as a graduate assistant, I don't deal with like grading. But another good idea is to have time after the project is due for adjusting a grade. Some of you may like that idea, some of you may not, but it's something to keep in mind. You can have the initial due date where the majority of their grade comes from that initial due date, but then a revision is allowed with extra time, and you just want to build that into your project. All right, so how do you teach digital technologies or digital literacy in the classroom? So I'm going to go into some of the larger concepts that we talk about as our aims or our goals here in Leader, and all of them come from Brandon's forthcoming paper that's coming out in Digital Humanities Quarterly. So all of you should go get it, yeah, and then tweet at him about it that you read it, and I don't know, do other things that show that he wrote it. So like the next 4 slides are basically right from his paper through conversations that we've had, but they're from Brandon. So you really have 4 skills, and each slide will be about a different, or 4 larger themes. And the first is information literacy, and it's about accessing content and creating content, making sure that students understand the larger picture regarding the content that they put on a website or that they put into a project, that they can't simply just go grab text off of a website and throw it into their own and that be okay. Plagiarism comes into information literacy in ways that students for some reason don't think about. You need to give attribution. You need to not simply wholesale quote things, right? You have to produce the content yourself. And for some reason, when it's not a paper, students don't make that leap. So it's something to discuss with them. But also images. Students almost never think about image attribution, which we've talked about this whole week, right? And we talked about last year. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're building a project and students are going to be expected to use images, you need to show them, you need to teach them how to use images properly, where to get them from so that you know that they're acceptable sources, and how to properly reference those sources in the places that they need to be referenced, even if it's, say, on the image caption itself and at the end or on a bibliography page within a website or something like that. And all of this applies to books and journals as well, but students in general are better at understanding those concepts when they relate to books and journals than they do when they relate to websites and images. So that's something to keep, and video, that's another big one. So something to keep in mind. So digital literacy itself is about using tools or creating tools, creating content that's digital and presenting it online or offline but in digital format. And things that fall under this are like knowledge related to web programming languages or website design and layout, which I'm terrible at design and layout. And as this presentation shows, I'm really bad at design and layout. My stuff looks boring and bad color choice. But I understand that it's important, and I am continuing to work on it, rather than say if you just throw students at it without really giving any time to talk about it, they won't understand that if you have a badly laid out website, the content that it contains is not going to be retained by the people who are accessing that website. Does that make sense? You guys get what I mean? Okay. And then web programming languages themselves, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, those fall under this same umbrella. If a student can't write in JavaScript, then you probably shouldn't ask them to do a JavaScript-based project unless you teach them first. We don't do that here. We teach mostly very, very basic HTML and CSS. And then I would assume that if we went with a much, much larger project that was, say, the entire semester's worth, where the course was built around the digital project itself, that would be a space in which, and students maybe don't already have that knowledge, that would be an appropriate project where you could have them learn JavaScript and then be writing or altering JavaScript that already exists. Learning about multimodal platforms or multimodal, I can never say that word, content presentation. So some of our best projects that have gone through here involved writing content, producing videos, and taking pictures for use on, say, a website and the website itself. So you have text, the website design, the video production, and taking of images are all platforms that are, or all approaches that are being used in the one project. And they produce more, I don't know, visually pleasing and varied products at the end that really do a better job of getting content consumers to remember that material. And students need to be taught in all of them to get that to work. And then I have specific tool use. So using specific tools is important, and teaching them is important, and you can't forget that side of it. But you also don't want to just teach the single tool and have them use the single tool, and you don't cover, say you have them learn how to do video editing software, and they learn how to do that, but then you never talked about crafting a narrative and what it means to craft a narrative and what it means to represent something visually. Like those kinds of those parts of the conversation are just as important. Then you have data literacy. So data literacy is all about, I reversed those, that was a mistake. Critical evaluation of data, and then also assembly of data. So you're looking at teaching students about how to evaluate data sets that they may gain access to. Who created it and why? How did they do it? Is it relevant? Is it, was it an appropriate way to produce that data? Is the metadata good enough for you to use this in the way that you want to use it? That kind of stuff. And then also, when they produce their own databases or data sets, producing it with the relevant metadata that's required and doing it in a way that's appropriate for how it's going to be used and that kind of stuff. And then also data manipulation itself. You know, what kinds of analyses can you run over a data set or put a database through? What kinds of conclusions can you draw from this stuff? And then also spotting manipulation in terms of what kinds of things have been done with this data. Like say you receive, say a student is looking at something that has sketchy conclusions that are being brought out of a data set, like they need to be able to understand why those conclusions may not be representative of the actual data set, what kinds of things were done to help support the argument that was being made that maybe was not appropriate. Do you understand what I mean by that? Okay. And then computational analysis, which I have the least grasp over, which is really funny because I'm the 3D technologies assistant. But because 3D scanning and printing falls under computational analysis, you simply cannot do them without heavy computing happening somewhere. And so this category is about using those tools in ways that let us do things that humans would not normally be able to do at all without computational assistance. So the ones that I have an easier time of understanding that they fall in this is text analysis and network analysis, because you simply can't read through 5 million tweets and run analysis on them by yourself. You have to use a tool to do that, or even get access to the tweets themselves. So it's that kind of stuff. Okay. Did I present that right, Brandon? Sure. Awesome. we can maybe help my questions later, your guys' questions later on. So I have some examples that I was going to show. These are our examples that are of successful projects that were successful in some way. All of my tabs. So I don't remember if I specifically presented Digital Atlas of Egyptian Archaeology last year. Did I bring it up in class or in the institute? Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. I'll show it again. So here's Digital Atlas of Egyptian Archaeology, or DAEA, and it's a GitHub hosted website where students place pins on a map. They write content for those pins. They produce a link at the bottom of that pop-up, and then the link goes out to their site report that they've written about the place. Now this is the example site. This is the one that I brought over from a past project and put in as an example for how students can write the code and format their material and all of that stuff. So that's why it has William Petrie on it instead of me. So it provides some examples of, how do you make the basics of how do you make an image with a caption. How can you produce links that create popovers that show the full text citation? How do you put in a line? I don't know if you can see on this screen, but there's a line under each of the headings. And it's like that kind of basic stuff, but we cover that in the larger conversation of why do you design a website to look this way? And then some examples of maybe something you shouldn't do. That should probably be shrunk down, but it's not. So yeah, and then resources, so you have your bibliography at the end. But students go through three or four technical sessions where they're learning skills, and then at least four open lab sessions where they come in and work on their projects. And it's a large portion of the final grade for the class. And we do a whole day that's devoted to how to use GitHub, introducing terminology, because GitHub has lots of strange words that people don't intuitively pick up right away. And also talk about certain actions in ways that isn't intuitive. Like when you make a pull request, you're making the pull request to the base fork from the, in some cases, head fork, and in other cases, the compare. Does anybody, yeah. So like it takes time for students to understand that. So we do that early on, get them introduced to it, and then continue to reinforce the language as we move forward. Then we do a whole day of HTML introduction where we rely on Codecademy, thank you Codecademy, on their course for getting the very basics of HTML and CSS, mostly HTML. And then we do another session where they put it all together and they do, they learn the specifics of creating an image with a figure, in a figure container with a caption, which is also not intuitive. So they have to learn the basics of how do containers work within the HTML language. Why are we not using div containers, which they do learn about in Codecademy, and why instead are we using figure containers, which they do not learn about. And then little things that people don't usually think about, like when you're writing up HTML and you want to put in an image, and you've saved that image locally on your in your directory, how do you reference the local image without referencing the full URL that's technically external? And that's important because that's a part of the structure of your website, right? If you took a website where all of the images were referred to as if they were all external, but they're all saved locally, and then you moved it to another domain, it would break everything. So you have to, we teach that kind of stuff.
Can I just ask
yeah.
quickly, do the students have some kind of digital portfolio that they can put these things into then, that they can take out?
When they're finished?
Yeah.
You can use a capstone as an example.
Yeah, so we don't specifically have that, but we do partner with the faculty members that teach, or at least we have, faculty members that teach at least the anthropology capstone course, and they're required to create a portfolio of some kind that ends up going to the department, and the department uses it to evaluate their
Not
their
evaluate the
goals.
students.
Not
It's
the-
used to evaluate how well we train the
Yeah.
students.
So it's evaluating the department, right? And last year we produced, they were online portfolios that were a part of, they were supposed to be a part of a larger individual student website that was for their own presentation to the world. So like it had their CV or their resume on it, and job experience, and maybe a bio and things like that.
And they
then,
had papers from classes
yeah,
and things like that.
as examples.
In the section that I teach, I require them to actually create a website and to begin branding themselves. We don't require that as a department, but we do require that they have some kind of portfolio where they put.
Yeah. Which increasingly, I'm thinking this is a way to help students with jobs. You know,
Exactly.
Go
Yeah.
out, to demonstrate that they have these skills, just
Yeah.
to be able to click very quickly on something and say, oh, you know, I've done this.
Yeah. And your question has actually reminded me, there's something that I left out of the developing a program, which is you have to have the infrastructure to handle all of these online projects. I completely skipped over it when I mentioned Matrix. Matrix provides us basically unlimited server space, and we host everything on Matrix's servers. And they say they're hosting it in perpetuity, so whenever Matrix finally goes down, that's when everything goes down. But see, I've made the director of Matrix angry at me for saying that his place might go down. So you know, all of the student websites can go up there. Now the portfolios, everything can go on those servers, and we will maintain that access, like online access, for as long as we can.
I also give students the option of doing something like getting a student account through Reclaim Hosting,
Yeah.
and then that way it's not dependent on the university that they're going to be leaving. And so it's more
Yeah.
an independent entity, which is helpful for a lot of students if they, are going to do something else.
But what's important to realize is if you produce, say as a hypothetical student, they produce a portfolio that showcases themselves and then some of their work, and some of that work is saved in a project like DAEA, it has to be in a location where it will be there long enough for that link to stay up. Now we're using GitHub in this case, and GitHub may go down at some point and never go back up again. That's a risk that we took. But we wanted to utilize the other, we wanted to teach the other aspects of GitHub itself, which I taught last year. And so that's why we made that compromise. Now there are a lot of projects, many of the other ones that I'm going to show. Here, I'll go to the next one. What? It downloaded it instead. These are hosted on Matrix's servers as a part of Leader's own website. We have a WordPress website, and then we can like tie in other technologies into our URLs themselves. So all of our Omeka websites go through the project's not subdomain, but the suffix of projects. So anyway, this is on Matrix's website or Matrix's servers. This will stay up as long as Leader stays up, and this is fantastic program where students built life history presentations related to individual people. So like this person used Timeline.js. Right, so you get like this, and it incorporates multimodal, it incorporates video, and they've written text, right? And so this class went through the basics of how do you produce a narrative? How do you produce a narrative that's representative of an oral history that you've just taken down? That kind of stuff. Does that make sense? Here's another one. This one embedded a map within a WordPress site. And it's called Hunt, Gather, Farm. And they were looking at hunting and gathering and the emergence of farming around the world. I do not know this site very well because I wasn't involved in it, but this is this was for an archaeology class. I can't remember the name of the actual class. Do either of you remember what class Adrian taught last year?
It was a hunters, gatherers, and foragers, or hunters and foragers. Yeah.
Okay, there we go. And so students contributed to the material that goes in this, and you click on these, and it can give you information. That was a poor example, but so they've written information about that specific region that this is relating to, and then you can also get to more in-depth stuff here. So we can go to the Sahel instead. And then they produced specific pages that didn't load properly. I don't know why it's doing that, but so yeah. And if you notice, most of our successful projects are multimodal in their presentation of content. Let me show you one more. This is this is another history course project where students, was it a single student or multiple students? Yeah, so the class developed information about Malcolm X's history here in Lansing. And you can get a better view of the map. This, right? And then each of these tell you something about that location. And then you can scroll down and get more information, like his homes. Yeah. So that kind of stuff. All right. Not everything works. So these are challenging examples. This first one I mentioned already is the Michigan History Project, a part of the course Michigan History. And students are asked to write a website for either their hometown or a town that they've chosen in Michigan. And then some of those end up linked via a Mapbox Classic map with pins on the main website. And so you get the pin and the website link that goes here, and then you go out to individual websites. Now, for individual students, this can be useful in terms of thinking about the differences between writing a paper about a place and writing a website. Since websites are interactive and they're visual, you can't just throw black text on a white background and be done with it. You need other stuff that goes with it, right? So this can, in principle, get students thinking about these things, but it doesn't always work. Sometimes we get websites that come in that the student has basically done none of that thinking, and they really don't work. In a couple cases, we've had students literally go to the website of a town and take text from that and put it on their own website. And even if they had quoted it, obviously still didn't do the assignment, which was to write about their own town. Yeah, so those kinds of things happen in this. And you get, so this was one specific location. All of these are different. And this was supposed to be a cohesive website for all of these places in Michigan. Wow, I picked one that looked exactly the same. We didn't switch them all to the same template, did we, Brandon? Yeah, he's busy. They look, the websites are, they have different, they choose different templates. So like this one looks different. And so there's no aesthetic cohesiveness to the design decisions, which admittedly would be very hard for 120 students. I already did that one. Let's do Dexter. I'm having a hard time finding poor examples, but which is really funny. Yeah, but there is difference from site to site, and that really causes a problem with the overall aesthetic design of the website. I think we mentioned earlier in the week about not doing these things live. Yeah, this is one of the reasons why. And then I'm going to talk about two challenging examples that are identical. Whoops. That are identical in their structure. I think down to the very tiles that we chose. Oh, there is a different background image. That's good. Yeah, so this class, Pseudo-Archaeology, and this other class, Great Discoveries in Archaeology, the idea was to take what we did in the digital atlas and create a low entry version where students use WordPress to create the same kinds of, the same general kind of content. I mean, they're not writing site reports necessarily. They're more discussing socio-archaeological events or places, or they're writing about the greatest hits of archaeology in the world. But the reality is that students didn't learn much in the way of digital skills or any of the anything from the 4 categories that we laid out, mainly because the entire focus was on, here's how you use WordPress, here, go use WordPress, and then write this thing. So they still wrote something, and that was productive, and there was something worthwhile that came out of it, but it wasn't as worthwhile as it could have been. And I'm not so sure that in this iteration, these courses really added anything digital to what the students were doing beyond the Let's Learn WordPress. So that is my nice way of saying things about this. But it was Ethan. These are Ethan's courses, so maybe he wants to share a little more about them.
So the Great Discoveries is sort of a larger enrollment class. It's between 75 and 100 people, and because it was larger, and also because it was a 200 level class, I had sort of convinced myself that the model we had developed for the Digital Atlas project, or the model that I used in my intro to archaeology, honors archaeology class, which Brian hasn't showed, which was a digital encyclopedia of archaeologists. It was the GitHub model, same thing. I had sort of convinced myself that one, it was a little too challenging for a 200 level class, a little too much to ask, and two, the class was too large to be able to do it manageably. My pseudo-archaeology class, which is a 300 level class, is not a very large enrollment class. It's a 30, and it always caps at 30. It always goes up. But I for whatever reason, and this was actually the first time I had taught the pseudo class under its real number. So in that case, I was still sort of working the kinks out of the class itself. I had taught it under special topics and stuff, but so I again in that case I convinced myself that I didn't want to add this extra very complicated technical burden, which the Digital Atlas and the Digital Encyclopedia projects have. That model, those moving parts are actually quite complicated. And so we went with the same sort of thing. I mean, I like mapping things, blah, blah, blah. So we went with this model, and it's kind of pointless, the project. Again, like Brian said, they wrote stuff, they researched. I mean, could you pop open one of the points?
You want to pick one?
I don't even remember what's what.
But we removed all of the material about how to use GitHub, which was relevant to all those concepts. We removed all the material about how to do HTML. We removed all of the material about how do you lay out your page, and instead students were just given WordPress to create something. This student didn't even choose a new theme.
And we see that. I mean, I think that, so in the Digital Atlas and the Digital Encyclopedia projects, there is a spectrum, right, of not very good and really, really good. But generally speaking, the spectrum was skewed towards the better in those classes, because there was a lot more sort of thoughtful onboarding and thoughtful kind of hand-holding in the best possible way. In these other two projects, the spectrum skewed towards the lazy and the not as involved, because they didn't have to be. You know, they just, and most of the time it's like, they got a site, they wrote something up in Word, they copied it, they pasted it, done. So it was a failure of, I mean, I consider both of these projects failures from my perspective. But it was a failure of the combination of the platforms. It was a combination of my sort of again, what I had convinced myself because of these two separate classes where, you know, one was high enrollment, one was new, and that's why they didn't work out too terribly well. The students in both the pseudo class and the Great Discoveries, the students, generally speaking, got a little bit of a rise out of it because it was doing something that they didn't normally do, right? You know, I mean, it was still, they wrote up a paper-length thing, essentially, but they were doing it in another context. And I also, you know, I framed, especially the pseudo-archaeology class, because a lot of the discussion and the debate and the sort of the friction and the conflict that happens around pseudo-archaeology happens in public context. So what I was saying is, you're writing for that public context. So there was they enjoyed that, but, you know, altogether, I think the two projects were failures. And I will not do them again that way. When I teach pseudo next fall, I'm going to do something else entirely. I may go with the GitHub model, I don't know, but I am not doing this.
And I'm thanking him for not doing it.
He's thanking you for not doing it.
I'm thanking you for not doing it.
It was also the architecture was a little bit complicated because WordPress, the way that we deployed it here, and also the way it was deployed in Michigan history, it just ain't made to do that.
No, it's not.
And there was lots of sort of hacking and plugins to override functionality and, you know, force it to do things, and it was a hack, the site.
With all of our websites, we tend to run into that problem where students will write something in Word and then show up 2 days before it's due and then say, okay, I need to get this into here. You know, when we try to emphasize that kind of stuff, like, think about how you can use visual aids to compel this. Think about how to write for the web. You know, Ethan mentioned writing for a public audience, but also just thinking about writing stuff that just works better on the web, that looks better, that's more readable, and thinking about how to break it up, how it might be useful to use the visual structure of like a menu or, you know, sub-menus and all those things to break up and kind of make your structure more clear to readers and stuff like that. And I often find myself like sounding like someone in 1997 being like, think about hypertext, like what can we do with hypertext, right? But even just doing that, thinking about like enabling people to kind of jump around, like how does that change the way we write, the way we structure, and, you know, our capabilities for communicating this kind of stuff. So yeah, we continue to have people who write a paper and say, let me paste this in.
And the one thing, I mean, we've had this discussion where sort of the GitHub model is at the very high end of sort of technical complexity. When we originally sort of put the model together the first time I taught the Egyptian archaeology class, I was really worried about it. It required and expected some fairly intense and in-depth, you know, getting on these technical skills. And so that's at that end of the spectrum, where the WordPress is at the you know, frankly, the stupid end of the spectrum. It's easy to use. We need somewhere in between. Something in between that is challenging enough to meet these various sort of the 4 learning goals, but not so challenging and not so architecturally complex. We're talking about these massive sites and WordPress not being able to do what we want. That we can deploy in larger classes or more basic classes, something like that. And we haven't quite found it.
I want to add something because people keep reacting when we talk about WordPress.
Yeah, this is,
Okay.
We're talking about WordPress.
We're
I'm
not-
talking about its deployment.
So we're talking about projects where students create low-level content. They're basically writing, they could write a paper, and we don't want them to write a paper. We want them to write something else. And they just write a paper, and then they throw it into WordPress. And so all they did really was write a paper and then click a few times, right? That's entirely different from the, yeah, that's entirely different from the content that you guys are producing and then putting into, using WordPress to present it. It's so much different. So different.
Sorry?
How much of that is resistance in the student to the idea that this isn't scholarly? So that part of it. Okay, so your students are way better than mine.
Or no. Watch Sean get fired on the line. No, they didn't express that. But I'm also, again, I also frame, I mean, all of my classes are, regardless of what they are, it has an aspect of public scholarship. And, whether, writing the public or writing for the public, writing for publics. So that's already like the foundation of the class. And anyone at this stage of the game who takes a class from me, and I have lots of repeat students, they know what they're getting into.
Well, but this is my thing, right? I have a class that says video games, and it says you will make a video game.
Yep.
And then you get to the end of the course, and there's a significant chunk who never made the damn game.
Yeah.
And the actual coach said to me, well, I just never really bought into what you do. Like, why the hell are you in a class?
But are those students the same students who are in a traditional class are not handing their paper in, right? And it has nothing to do with the mode of production, and it has to do with the student itself. And they're using the mode of production in your class as an excuse because they're lazy-ass students.
And that was my point. It's just, resist.
Yeah. I'm not finding it. The most resistance that I had, there was no resistance in the pseudo class or the Great Discoveries class. The resistance that I found in the other classes where I use the GitHub model is the technical hurdle. At the beginning, 3/4 of them are scared out of their minds. And part of what we do, yeah, I mean, they're terrified. Oh my God, how am I going to pass this class? But part of what we do is onboarding, right? It's easing them into it and reassuring them every class and everything at the beginning. I'm like, you guys are scared. This is terrifying. It means nothing to you. I guarantee you it will mean something to you at the end of the class. And it always does. Always does. Except for, a few outcomes.
It may also help that I'm the one who comes in and says, don't worry about these things. We've got it. We're going to walk you through this. It's not really as complicated as it looks. Please stick it out, keep an open mind, and try it out. I'm sure Ethan says those things too.
Yes.
But when I come in and say them, it's a second person who is not in charge of their grade.
Exactly.
And I think that helps. And honestly, when we've done the GitHub model 3 times, 3 different courses, and in every single course, we've had at least one student be like, oh crap, what am I doing? How am I going to get through this? And of the 3 courses, of the people who have said that, I would say like 90% of them ended up producing good projects. They were fine. And the very small number who didn't, I think only one of them actually didn't produce anything at all. And that likely, I can't say for sure, but that likely had less to do with the material that they were being asked to learn, or the skills that they were being asked to learn, and more to do with student side issues. I can't say that for sure, but.
And this is also, yeah. So 2 of these are my classes. One of them was a North American Indian Alphabet class.
Yeah.
So is it completely different populations?
So yeah, oh, I had one more slide. Talking all this time.
You're not getting anybody talking about my crappy class.
All of the examples are at leader.msu.edu/projects. Not all of them, because I have been a bad graduate assistant and haven't put up the ones that I was supposed to put up. So I have to do that.
There are also a lot that, I mean, will do things just that are in their classroom,
Yeah.
they'll write an essay.
Oh.
Reflecting on it, and there's some that do interviews, that we didn't want to put online publicly, for privacy issues. So there are other reasons.
Yeah,
why.
do I have time to talk a little bit about that, or should I answer questions instead?
I think that's, yes.
Yeah, okay,
important.
so that's something that, so this entire presentation was about developing Leader or Leader program with the Leader model, and then doing this work online publicly in front of the world, who is, quite frankly, doesn't give a shit and isn't looking. All of this is happening, right?
He's a grad student and already he's like jaded.
I'm so jaded. You can still do almost everything that we've described here, and it doesn't have to be public. And then at least in the United States, you should be aware that when you have things that are going up, if you have things going up online, you generally need to, I think you always need to have an alternative assignment that students can do. Now that being said, of all of the classes that we've done in here, I don't think anyone has anyone ever requested to do something other than what we were doing online?
No.
No.
And we've had thousands of students come through here. So
I think they realize they're not going to get any help if they do the alternative, so they just stick with
but we make it available, and it's a significant assignment that replaces what they're going to be doing instead.
And the availability of the alternative assignment is due to disability issues or just opting out?
FERPA.
Both?
It's
FERPA
for opting out.
Okay.
We can also do for disability reasons too, if there is a disability that will keep a student from completing a project. I would assume a professor will work to develop an assignment that would be appropriate, because that's a part of doing that, right?
It's worth mentioning, so almost all of my classes have a very strong sort of public scholarship component, whether it's, working online, writing online, whatnot, and the sort of rhetoric that I use as, I talk with students at the beginning of the class about what does open scholarship mean, what is open licensing, what are the implications of this, I talk about licenses and how licenses work. And then I also say, look, because of FERPA, but also just because I'm a decent human being, you can say, I don't want this stuff to be public, or I don't want these posts to be public, or I don't want this one to be public, or this one assignment. Any permutation, combination, you don't have to give me a reason, you don't have to give me an explanation, it goes down immediately. It has only happened once in class, where there was a student who was being stalked, and it's just like, and they provided the reason. I'm like, you don't have to provide me the reason, just tell me and talk. But the one thing and I also say, look, this stuff is going to stay up in years and years and years of teaching, and this stuff is still up. If for any reason after the class you want it taken down, you just send me an email. And that surprisingly has happened, I don't know, maybe 5, 6 times, maybe a little bit more. Every time the email has come, they say, it's because I'm applying to law school.
Right.
Seriously.
That's right.
Yeah, which says something interesting about what they're reviewing in law school. And it goes down, it's gone.
So if you've gotten the picture by now, we're pretty open. We do open stuff. We use open source technology. We publish things online as much as we can. But digital literacy does not necessarily mean it's open and online and available for everyone. And there are plenty of, especially sociocultural anthropologists here at MSU, who are amenable to the idea of working with Leader, but not with projects that are open and to the public. And we have done plenty of courses, like I would say 5 maybe, that have had work that was produced that never saw the public sphere. And we work with those too. It's just I can't show them to you. Yeah, so there's that too.
The biggest pushback we have in the anthropology department is because of that.
Yeah.
It's because of privacy, just sort of general issues of privacy, but it's also issue of one, sensitivity of subjects, and then it's also sensitivity of subject, the actual material. So faculty member who works in the contemporary Middle East and political issues and urbanism is always very rightly concerned about this sort of content going online and attracting the attention of, you know, sort of neocons or right wing, or who would take this as an opportunity to say, look at the stuff they're teaching in modern universities today. Right? I mean, we've seen this a million times, this kind of thing.
Okay. So that's the end. I know everybody's probably hungry and it's almost lunchtime, but I can answer questions. Yeah.
I was just wondering, on the kind of flip side of talking about students coming in with less digital skills that you might expect them to, and the idea of kind of people resisting some elements if they're afraid of them and that sort of thing, how do you deal with students who come in with like way more digital expertise than most of them, and make sure that they're still getting the opportunity to learn and develop without being bored out of their skull?
I have less experience with that, but Ethan raised his hand immediately.
So in my honors intro class, the honors intro class, intro to archaeology class, it typically has almost no anthropology majors and almost always filled with, or a good portion of it, engineering, CS. So in that class, when I do this, I mean, how many of you know GitHub? In that class, half the hands go up. So there tends to be a higher level of sort of digital aptitude and digital skill. Oftentimes, it is not, they're not as familiar with all the moving parts that we've put together, so the workflow. So it's not like they just do the thing and sit around and twiddle their thumbs. They have to learn that workflow, which is determined by the goals that we set in the class and stuff like that. So that is the experience with that.
But that's only in that honors section.
It is, and that is all of the other classes.
Yeah.
Doesn't happen.
So
When I teach, I always end up with like one person who was a computer programmer in a past life or something like that.
So here's another part of this, though. A part of what I was talking about is that you don't want to teach the tool. You want to teach
Right.
overarching concepts. They should still be intellectually challenged by those overarching concepts. Yeah.
Question about digital competency of people coming in. It's about
Digital competency?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't really do this anymore, but for the first year or two we were in here, for every class I would say, okay, so like who has built a website before? And there's usually like one or two people. And like who's blogged before? And it's one or two people. And it almost always was because they had taken one of Ethan's classes. You know, I stopped doing that because we started getting more repeat people who had said, I've only done this in the context of leader. So yeah, I mean, for the most part, most students have not done anything like that, or maybe they made like a video when they were in high school for some class, but haven't really touched anything since then. So
Certain high schools have them do a lot of videos,
Yeah.
I will say.
Yeah.
In the context of some of the classes that I've taught, which are a different kettle of fish than this, but yeah, you do get the students who come in who have a bit of it. They think they know a lot of stuff already. So in my class, the things are designed to challenge at different levels, and the actual assessment is not on the thing you've done, but how far you've pushed yourself. So you're being graded against yourself for where you've already started from. And I make that really clear to the students. So I end up with, one student built a virtual machine and filled it full of tools for doing digital history. Another student was only ever able to do a very simple dots on the map kind of thing. But in the context of what they had set for themselves, that's how I was grading it. So I try and co-opt it. Sometimes works.
The one thing, so in past class, before Leader even came along, I had students doing Wikipedia editing assignments. I mean, it's a sort of low barrier to entry public scholarship. And very much a counter to that argument that a lot of faculty will make about, oh, don't use Wikipedia, right? Okay, then let's make Wikipedia. And I have found over the years of doing that, and I still have it in a lot of my classes, then at the beginning of the class, the number of students who edited Wikipedia has increased exponentially in class. You know, now it's probably half the class, just like in a regular intro class. It's like they've edited Wikipedia.
I like that idea about what things are low barrier to entry, quote
it's either low barrier to entry, but also they're much more successful if it's something that they see will help them personally. In other words, so if it's like about their knowledge, their website, their portfolio, whatever it is, they're much more likely to buy in and really get involved in it.
Yeah, that's absolutely, and you work to make it relevant to them, as opposed to relevant to you in the context of the class, otherwise it's more like.
Anyone else? Everybody's hungry?
All right, thank you very much, Brian.
Awesome.
All right, we're gonna go for lunch, come back here, 1:15. We will do Scrum, we will work for a little bit. The Jen Sabrini's gonna come in and the senior PO for AH and the PO for this grant will come and sort of welcome you guys and talk about grants in the future and stuff like that. Then we'll have a little more working time and then break and then dinner time.
I just want to note that